The massive stone structure of the Colosseum dominated the Roman skyline like a crown of death and glory. 50,000 spectators roared with bloodlust, their voices echoing through the air like thunder rolling across the seven hills. Banners fluttered in the Mediterranean breeze as vendors hawked wine and roasted meat to the crowd streaming through the arched entrances, all eager to witness another day of carnage in the name of Roman entertainment. Deep beneath the arena floor, in the shadowy network of tunnels and cells that housed Rome's most expendable assets, Marcus Aurelius Maximus sat alone in his cramped stone prison. His massive frame barely fit within the confines of the cell, broad shoulders pressed against cold walls that had witnessed the final hours of countless men. Scars crisscrossed his muscled torso like a map of battles fought and survived, each mark telling a story of violence that had shaped him into the most feared gladiator in all of Rome. His dark hair hung long and wild about his shoulders, his beard untamed by Roman grooming standards, giving him the appearance of the savage beast the crowds believed him to be. But his eyes told a different story entirely. Deep brown and thoughtful, they held a gentleness that contradicted every rumor whispered about the man they called the wild beast of the arena. These were not the eyes of a mindless killer, but of a soul that had been broken and reformed in the crucible of survival, a man who had learned to wear monstrosity as armor while keeping his humanity hidden deep within. In the adjacent cell, young Lucius trembled like a leaf in a winter storm. At 19, he was still new enough to the gladiatorial life to feel the full weight of terror before each match. His hands shook as he gripped the iron bars, knuckles white with the strain of holding onto something solid in a world that seemed determined to tear him apart. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant roar of the crowd above. "They say today we face the Nubian lions. 3 of them. I don't think I can do this. I'm not ready." Marcus looked up from his meditation, his expression immediately softening as he saw the boy's terror. Despite everything the arena had taken from him, despite the reputation forced upon him by Roman bloodsport, he could not watch a young man face death without offering what comfort he could. He moved closer to the bars that separated them, his voice gentle as morning rain. "Look at me, Lucius. What did I teach you when you first came here?" The young gladiator's breathing was ragged, but he tried to focus on Marcus's words. "Stay low, watch their eyes, never turn your back to a predator." "And what else?" "Fight to live another day," Lucius answered. The words barely a whisper. Marcus nodded, reaching through the bars to place a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that had dealt so much death in the arena above. "That's right. We're not animals, no matter what they call us. We're men. We have souls, hearts, dreams that extend beyond these walls. Remember that when you step into that arena, you fight not because you're a beast, but because you're human, and humans endure." The heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor creaked open with the groan of ancient hinges, and Guard Captain Severus entered with his usual contingent of armed soldiers. He was a brutal man, with dead eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently twisted into a sneer of contempt. His leather armor bore the stains of years spent in the bowels of the Colosseum, and his sword hand never strayed far from his weapon's hilt. "Well, well," Severus said, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "The wild beast gives advice on humanity. How touching. Perhaps next you'll be teaching philosophy to the lions." He spat on the stone floor near Marcus's cell, the sound echoing in the narrow space. Marcus remained silent, having learned long ago that responding to Severus's provocations only brought more pain to himself and the other gladiators under the guard, captain's care. "Today's your lucky day, beast," Severus continued, his grin widening to reveal teeth yellowed by wine and neglect. "Senator Brutus has requested a special show. You'll be fighting something different today. Something that should provide the crowd with entertainment they'll remember for years to come." Marcus stood slowly, his full height impressive even in the low-ceilinged cell. "What do you mean?" Severus's laugh was like the sound of grinding stone. Let's just say the crowd will get to see what happens when a wild animal meets true innocence. The senator's been having trouble with a certain noble family, you see. It seems their daughter has been meddling in affairs that don't concern her. What better way to solve two problems at once than to let nature take its course? The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice water as the implications of Severus's words became clear. His hands gripped the iron bars so tightly his knuckles cracked. You can't mean to put an innocent woman in the arena with me. That's not combat, that's murder. Oh, but I do mean exactly that, Severus replied, his enjoyment of Marcus's distress evident in every word. The people of Rome love their moral lessons, and what better lesson than watching civilization face the savage reality of what lies beneath our polished marble facades. Severus turned and walked away, his laughter echoing off the stone walls as his footsteps disappeared into the labyrinth of tunnels that honeycombed the Colosseum's foundation. Marcus sank back onto his stone bench, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend the depths of Senator Brutus's cruelty. High above in the imperial box that overlooked the arena, Senator Gaius Brutus sat in splendor beside the empty throne reserved for Caesar himself. The emperor was away on campaign in Germania, leaving Rome's entertainment in the hands of men like Brutus, who understood that politics and spectacle were often indistinguishable. Rich fabrics in imperial purple and gold draped the viewing area, while servants offered the finest delicacies that Roman wealth could procure. Brutus was handsome in the way that Roman nobility prized, with sharp features and carefully maintained appearance that spoke of good breeding and better grooming. His senatorial toga was pristine white, marked with the purple stripe that denoted his rank, but there was something reptilian about his smile, something that suggested the civilized exterior concealed appetites that would make a barbarian blush. "Is everything prepared?" he asked his aide, a nervous man whose entire existence depended on anticipating his master's every whim. "Yes, Senator. The girl has been told she's here for a special ceremony honoring her father's service to Rome. She believes she's to present flowers in memory of fallen soldiers." Brutus's smile widened with satisfaction. "Perfect, and she suspects nothing of the true nature of today's entertainment?" "Nothing at all, my lord. She's preparing now, completely unaware that she's walked into your web." Sometimes Brutus mused, swirling wine in his golden cup. The most beautiful flowers must be crushed to make the finest perfume. Today I solve the problem of her meddling in my affairs and provide Rome with a spectacle that will be remembered for generations. In a preparation chamber reserved for nobility participating in arena ceremonies, Lydia Octavia stood before a polished bronze mirror, adjusting a crown of white flowers that had been woven into her dark hair. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with the kind of classical features that Roman poets spent lifetimes trying to capture in verse. But it was the intelligence and strength in her green eyes that truly set her apart from the pampered daughters of Rome's elite. Her silk stola was pure white, symbolizing her virtue and unmarried status, while golden bracelets on her wrists spoke of her family's wealth and position. Helena, her loyal servant and the woman who had raised her after her mother's death, fussed nervously with the folds of Lydia's garment. At 50, Helena had served the family for 3 decades and had developed the kind of intuition that came from years of navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics. "Mistress," she said, her voice tight with worry, "something feels wrong about this whole affair. Why would they want you in the arena itself? Usually, nobility observes from the safety of the boxes. I've never heard of a ceremony that requires a senator's daughter to walk on the killing floor." Lydia turned from the mirror with the kind of serene confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege and purpose. "Father served Rome faithfully for 30 years. Helena, he commanded legions, built roads, and brought civilization to the barbarian lands. It's only fitting that his daughter should honor our fallen heroes, where they made their ultimate sacrifice for the glory of Rome." "But the gladiators, mistress," Helena pressed, wringing her hands. "They say they're dangerous men, wild animals barely contained by Roman discipline. What if something goes wrong?" Lydia's expression grew thoughtful, and she unconsciously touched a small pendant hidden beneath her stole. It was a Star of David, her mother's last gift, and the only remnant of a heritage she was forced to keep secret in a Rome that viewed such bloodlines with suspicion and hatred. "Are they really animals, Helena?" she asked quietly. "Or are they simply men forced into impossible circumstances by a system that values spectacle over human dignity? Sometimes I wonder if we Romans are truly the civilized ones, or if civilizations is just a mask we wear to hide our own capacity for savagery." Before Helena could respond, a herald entered the chamber with the abrupt efficiency that marked all official Roman business. "My lady, it's time. The ceremony begins now," and the crowd grows restless. Lydia took a deep breath, picked up a woven basket filled with rose petals and white lilies, and followed the herald toward her destiny. She had no way of knowing that, with each step, she was walking deeper into a trap that would change not only her life, but the life of a man she had never met, whose reputation as a monster concealed the heart of a protector. Marcus stood at the gate that led to the arena floor, his hands wrapped around iron bars that had been worn smooth by the desperate grips of countless men facing their final moments. Through the gaps, he could see the massive oval of sand that stretched before him, surrounded by tier upon tier of screaming Romans, whose hunger for blood seemed to grow with each passing moment. The crowd's chant echoed off the stone walls. "Beast! Beast!" A trainer approached with Marcus's weapons for the day, a gladiator's short sword, and a small round shield that seemed pitifully inadequate for whatever horror awaited him in the arena above. The man's face was grim, his usual pre-fight encouragement replaced by something that looked almost like grief. "Marcus," he called out, shouting to be heard over the crowd's roar, "listen to me carefully. They're sending in lions as promised, but that's not your real challenge today. There's something else, something worse." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "There's a woman, a noble woman. Brutus wants the crowd to see what happens when innocence meets brutality. He wants them to watch you become the monster they believe you to be." The gate began to rise with the grinding sound of chains and pulleys, operated by slaves hidden in the mechanical bowels of the great amphitheater. Sunlight streamed through the widening gap, carrying with it the sound of 50,000 voices raised in anticipation of blood. "Don't let them make you into what they say you are," the trainer called desperately as Marcus stepped toward the light. "You're better than this. You're better than what they've tried to make you." But his words were lost as Marcus emerged into the blinding brightness of the Roman sun, stepping onto sand that had been soaked with the blood of thousands who had walked this path before him. The moment he appeared, the crowd exploded into a frenzy that shook the very foundations of the Colosseum. 50,000 voices screamed his name, while flowers, coins, and curses rained down from the stands above. Marcus raised his shield and sword in the traditional salute to the crowd, acknowledging their presence as gladiatorial custom demanded, but his eyes were already scanning the arena for signs of the trap he knew was coming. The sand beneath his feet was fresh and white, carefully raked to provide the best possible backdrop for whatever drama Senator Brutus had orchestrated. Suddenly, the blare of trumpet fanfare cut through the noise, and the crowd fell into an expectant murmur. A voice boomed across the arena, amplified by the acoustic properties that Roman engineers had built into the very structure of their great amphitheater. "Citizens of Rome, today you witness not just combat, but a lesson in the natural order that governs all things. Behold how civilization fares when it meets the savage reality that lurks beneath our marble facades." A gate on the opposite side of the arena opened, and Marcus felt his heart stop as Lydia emerged into the sunlight. She walked with the grace of Roman nobility, scattering flower petals as she had been instructed, completely unaware that she was not participating in a ceremony, but rather walking into the most deadly trap ever conceived by Roman cruelty. Her white stola seemed to glow in the bright light, making her appear almost ethereal against the blood-stained sand. The crowd gasped and murmured, their bloodlust momentarily replaced by confusion. This was not the spectacle they had expected, and the sight of true innocence in their arena of death created a moment of cognitive dissonance that rippled through the stands. Marcus saw her and felt something break inside his chest. Without conscious thought, he dropped his weapons, the gladius and shield falling to the sand with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. "No," he shouted, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed arena. "This is not combat. This is not sport. This is murder." But his protest was lost as Lydia reached the center of the arena and turned in a slow circle, offering her flowers to honor the fallen, as she had been told. She was so focused on her ceremonial duty that she didn't immediately notice the massive gladiator across the sand from her, didn't see the way he had abandoned his weapons in horror at what was being asked of him. When her eyes finally found his, the distance between them seemed to collapse. Even from 50 yards away, she could see that he was not what she had expected. Yes, he was massive and scarred, his appearance wild and intimidating, but something in his posture, in the way he had cast aside his weapons, told her that this man was not the mindless beast of legend. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes held each other across the killing floor of the Colosseum, two souls recognizing something fundamental in each other despite the vast gulf of circumstance that separated them. Then the third gate opened, and the sound that emerged was not human. 3 Nubian lions, starved and maddened by captivity, bounded into the arena with the fluid grace of death incarnate. Their golden coats rippled with muscle, and their eyes held the single-minded focus of apex predators who had been denied their natural prey for far too long. The crowd erupted in approval, their momentary confusion forgotten in the face of the spectacle they had come to see. This was what they wanted: blood, terror, and the confirmation of their own superiority over both beast and gladiator. Lydia's scream pierced the air as the reality of her situation finally became clear. The ceremony was a lie, the honor was a trap, and she was about to die in the most public and horrible way imaginable. Her basket of flowers fell from nerveless fingers, the petals scattering across the sand like drops of blood. But even as 50,000 Romans roared their approval of her terror, even as 3 lions spread out to surround her with the patience of experienced hunters, Marcus Aurelius Maximus made a choice that defined not just who he was, but who he chose to remain despite everything that had been done to him. He ran toward her, not away. He ran toward certain death to place himself between innocence and savagery, between a woman who had never harmed anyone and beasts who knew only hunger. His feet pounded across the sand, each step taking him closer to a confrontation that he could not win, that he had no hope of surviving, but that he could not avoid if he wanted to remain human. He reached her just as the largest lion, a magnificent male with a black mane, gathered itself to spring. Marcus positioned himself between Lydia and death itself, weaponless, using nothing but his body and his will as her shield against the darkness that Rome had unleashed. "I feel your fear," he said softly, his voice somehow audible to her, despite the crowd's roar and her own hammering heartbeat. "So don't worry, I'm just a normal man." The words were simple, almost mundane, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. In this moment of ultimate testing, when everything he was and everything he believed about himself was stripped away, Marcus revealed the core of his being. Not a wild beast, not a savage killer, but simply a man who would rather die protecting innocence than live by destroying it. The first lion attacked, launching itself through the air with the liquid grace of a creature born to kill, and Marcus met its charge with nothing but his bare hands and the unshakable conviction that some things were worth dying for. The lion's massive body collided with Marcus like a bolt from Jupiter himself. 400 pounds of muscle and fury driving him backward across the sand. Razor-sharp claws raked across his chest, opening 4 parallel wounds that immediately began to bleed, but Marcus managed to wrap his powerful arms around the beast's neck before its jaws could find his throat. The crowd's roar became deafening as they witnessed the impossible sight of a man wrestling a Nubian lion with his bare hands. Behind him, Lydia pressed herself against his back, her hands clutching desperately at his shoulders as she tried to make herself as small as possible. She could feel the incredible heat radiating from his body, could smell the mixture of sweat, blood, and something indefinably masculine that spoke of strength and protection despite the chaos surrounding them. The lion thrashed violently, trying to break free from Marcus's grip, its hot breath washing over his face as it snarled and snapped inches from his eyes. Every muscle in his body strained against the beast's efforts to escape, his feet digging furrows in the sand as he fought to maintain his hold. Blood from the claw marks across his chest dripped steadily onto the arena floor, but he refused to release his grip. "Stay behind me," he grunted through gritted teeth, his voice strained with the effort of containing a creature that could easily kill them both. "No matter what happens, stay behind." The second lion began to circle them, looking for an opening to attack without harming its packmate, while the third hung back, waiting with the patience that made these creatures such effective hunters. Marcus knew he couldn't hold the first lion indefinitely, and when he released it, all 3 would attack at once. His mind raced, trying to find some strategy that might keep Lydia alive even if he couldn't save himself. Suddenly, inspiration struck. The weapons he had dropped lay scattered in the hand about 20 feet away, but between them and safety stood 2 more lions. However, there was something else, something the crowd's bloodlust had made them forget in their excitement over the spectacle. "Listen to me carefully," he said to Lydia, his voice low and urgent. "When I tell you to run, you run toward the Gladiator gate. Don't look back, don't hesitate, just run as fast as you've ever run in your life." "I can't leave you," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "They'll kill you. They're going to kill me anyway," Marcus replied with brutal honesty. "But maybe, just maybe, you can live through this. And if you do, remember that not all gladiators are monsters." With a surge of strength born from desperation, Marcus twisted the lion's neck and threw the great cat to one side, sending it rolling across the sand with a roar of fury and surprise. The move cost him precious seconds and left him exposed, but it also created the opening he needed. Now, Lydia hesitated for just a moment, torn between her desire to flee and her reluctance to abandon the man who was sacrificing himself for her safety. But Marcus's command brooked no argument, and she turned and ran toward the gate with every ounce of speed her trembling legs could muster. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and jeers, some Romans applauding her escape, while others demanded that she be brought back to face her fate. In the imperial box, Senator Brutus leaned forward with interest, his calculating mind already adapting to this unexpected development. The girl's escape was not part of his plan, but watching the wild beast fight 3 lions to protect her might actually prove more entertaining than her simple execution would have been. Marcus rolled to his left as the first lion recovered and leaped toward him again, its claws missing his head by inches. He came up running, sprinting toward his abandoned weapons with the desperate speed of a man who knew that seconds would determine whether he lived or died. Behind him he could hear all 3 lions in pursuit, their powerful legs eating up the distance with terrifying efficiency. His hand closed around the gladius just as the second lion crashed into him from behind, sending him sprawling face first into the sand. The sword went spinning away, but Marcus managed to grab his small shield as he rolled to avoid the snapping jaws that sought his spine. The circular bronze disc wasn't much protection against 3 lions, but it was better than nothing. Across the arena, Lydia reached the Gladiator gate only to find it sealed shut. The iron bars were locked from the outside, and no amount of pulling or pleading would open them. The guards on the other side watched her with expressions of mild interest, as if she were merely another part of the day's entertainment. "Please," she cried, reaching through the bars toward them. "You have to open the gate. That man is dying to save me." One of the guards, a grizzled veteran with scars covering his arms, shook his head slowly. "Can't do it, lady. Orders from the senator himself. Nobody leaves the arena until the show's over." Lydia spun around to see Marcus facing all three lions at once, using his shield to deflect their attacks, while desperately trying to reach his sword. Blood streamed from multiple wounds, and she could see that he was weakening with each passing moment. The sight of his suffering, knowing that he was enduring it for her sake, created a pain in her chest unlike anything she had ever experienced. Marcus managed to grab his gladius and came up swinging, the bronze blade catching the afternoon sun as it slashed across the muzzle of the nearest lion. The beast roared in pain and anger, backing away just far enough to give Marcus room to breathe. But the respite was temporary, and all three cats were now thoroughly enraged. In the stands, the crowd was on its feet, screaming with excitement as they witnessed a display of courage that exceeded even their bloodthirsty expectations. This was better than any scripted combat, better than any choreographed execution. This was real drama, real heroism, and real tragedy unfolding before their eyes. "Fight, beast," they chanted. "Fight, fight." But Marcus was no longer fighting for their entertainment. Every swing of his sword, every desperate parry with his shield, was motivated by a single thought: the woman behind him deserved to live. She deserved to see another sunrise, to laugh with friends, to love and be loved in return. Her life had value that transcended the political machinations that had brought them both to this place. The largest lion, the one with the black mane, seemed to sense that Marcus was weakening. It began to stalk forward with renewed confidence, its golden eyes fixed on the gladiator's throat. The other two cats spread out to either side, preparing for a coordinated attack that would finish their prey once and for all. Marcus steadied himself, raising his shield and sword in the classic gladiatorial stance he had learned through years of training and survival. His chest rose and fell with labored breathing, and sweat mixed with blood as it ran down his face. But his eyes remained clear and determined. If he was going to die, he would die as a man, not as the beast they wanted him to be. The attack came from all sides at once, three lions moving with the fluid coordination of a pack that had hunted together in the wild, each one targeting a different part of his body in an assault that no human could possibly survive. Marcus swung his sword in a desperate arc, trying to keep the deadly claws and fangs at bay, but he knew it was hopeless. Then, from somewhere behind him came a sound that made both man and beasts freeze in their tracks. It was the horn blast that signaled the end of a gladiatorial match, the sound that told fighters to lower their weapons and step back from combat. But there had been no victory, no clear resolution to the conflict in the arena. In the imperial box, Senator Brutus was on his feet, his face twisted with fury as he gestured wildly at someone below. A figure in a purple-striped toga had appeared beside him, an older man whose presence immediately commanded respect and attention from everyone in the vicinity. Marcus recognized him immediately. Senator Lucius Octavius, one of the most powerful men in Rome and a politician known for his integrity and honor. More importantly, he was Lydia's father, and his face was a mask of barely controlled rage as he stared down at the arena where his daughter cowered behind locked bars. "This ends now, Brutus," Octavius said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the Colosseum. "You have overstepped every boundary of decency and law. Release my daughter immediately, or face the consequences of your actions before the Senate itself." Brutus turned to face his political rival, his handsome features twisted into an ugly snarl. "Your daughter brought this on herself, with her meddling in affairs beyond her understanding. Perhaps this will teach her the proper place of women in Roman society. My daughter," Octavius replied with deadly calm, is under the protection of Roman law and the gods themselves. What you have done here today is not entertainment, it is attempted murder of a citizen of Rome. And that gladiator you're trying to kill, he's shown more honor in the last 10 minutes than you've displayed in your entire political career. The crowd murmured with uncertainty, sensing that the spectacle they had come to see was transforming into something far more significant. Political drama was always entertaining, but when it involved accusations of murder against a sitting senator, it became the stuff of legend. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, his sword still raised, the three lions circling him warily as they tried to understand why the hunt had suddenly stopped. Blood continued to flow from his wounds, but his eyes were fixed on the drama unfolding in the imperial box. Knowing instinctively that Lydia's fate, and perhaps his own, hung in the balance of whatever political confrontation was taking place above him, Brutus leaned forward, his hands gripping the marble railing of the box as he stared down at Marcus with undisguised hatred. "That creature is not a man, Octavius. He's a wild animal that belongs in a cage or in the ground, and your precious daughter will learn what happens to those who interfere with the natural order of things." "The only animal I see," Octavius replied, his voice carrying to every corner of the Colosseum, "is the one wearing a senator's toga." The insult hung in the air like a challenge to single combat, and the crowd held its breath as they waited to see how Brutus would respond. Political feuds had been known to spill over into actual violence, and the Colosseum had witnessed more than one senator's career end in bloodshed. But before Brutus could reply, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He lowered his sword and shield, and in a voice that somehow carried clearly through the vast amphitheater, he addressed the crowd. "Direct people of Rome," he called out, his words echoing off the stone walls. "I am Marcus Aurelius Maximus, and I was born a free citizen of this great empire. I have been called a beast, a savage, a creature without soul or conscience. But today, in this place where so many have died for your entertainment, I ask you to see the truth." The crowd fell silent, stunned by the eloquence and dignity in the gladiator's voice. This was not the growling monster of their imagination, but a man speaking with the kind of nobility that many of their own senators lacked. "I would rather die protecting innocence than live by destroying it," Marcus continued, his eyes finding Lydia where she stood pressed against the gate. "And if that makes me a beast in your eyes, then I accept that judgment gladly." He turned to face the lions, which had been growing increasingly agitated during the long pause in their hunt. With deliberate slowness, Marcus set down his weapons in the sand and spread his arms wide, offering himself as a target for their hunger. "But I will not kill for your pleasure anymore," he declared. "If you want blood today, it will have to be mine alone." The gesture was so unexpected, so utterly contrary to everything the crowd believed about gladiatorial combat, that for a moment the entire Colosseum fell into complete silence. Even the lions seemed confused by this display of passive resistance, unsure whether to attack a prey that was no longer fleeing or fighting. In that moment of perfect quiet, Lydia's voice rang out clear and strong from behind the iron bars that imprisoned her. "And I will not watch a hero die for my sake while I do nothing." She had found a loose stone among the rubble at the base of the arena wall, and with all the strength her noble upbringing had never prepared her for, she hurled it at the nearest lion. The rock struck the animal on the shoulder, not causing any real harm but startling it enough to break the spell that had frozen the entire scene. The lion roared in confusion and irritation, turning away from Marcus to investigate this new source of annoyance, and in that moment of distraction, something extraordinary happened. From the crowd itself, from the throats of 50,000 Romans who had come to see blood and death, rose a chant that no one could have predicted. "Mercy, mercy." They had witnessed something that transcended entertainment, something that spoke to a nobility of spirit that even their jaded souls could recognize and admire. The sight of a man choosing death over dishonor, of a woman risking herself to save her protector, had awakened something in them that their bloodlust had not entirely destroyed. Senator Octavius seized the moment with the political instincts that had made him one of Rome's most successful leaders. Standing at the edge of the imperial box, he raised his hand for silence, and when the crowd obeyed, his voice carried to every corner of the great amphitheater. "Citizens of Rome, you have seen today what true honor looks like. This gladiator has shown more courage and nobility than many who wear the toga of office. I call upon Caesar's mercy for both the gladiator and my daughter." The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. "Mercy, mercy." Even Brutus, for all his political cunning, could not stand against the will of 50,000 Romans demanding mercy. The crowd was the ultimate authority in the arena, and their verdict was clear. To continue the spectacle now would be political suicide. With obvious reluctance, he signaled to the guards below. The arena gates swung open, and a squad of Praetorian guards jogged onto the sand, their shields and spears creating a barrier between Marcus and the lions, while handlers with nets and ropes began the dangerous task of recapturing the great cats. Marcus swayed on his feet as the adrenaline that had sustained him began to fade, and the full extent of his injuries became apparent. Blood loss and exhaustion threatened to topple him, but he remained standing through sheer force of will, determined to meet whatever came next with dignity intact. Lydia was finally freed from behind the iron bars, and she ran across the sand toward Marcus without a thought for protocol or propriety. When she reached him, she caught his massive frame just as his knees began to buckle, her small hands surprisingly strong as she helped support his weight. "You saved me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked up into his eyes. "You were willing to die for me, and you don't even know my name." Marcus smiled, expression that transformed his scarred face into something unexpectedly gentle. "A name is just a word," he replied softly, "but courage, honor, compassion, these things need no introduction." As the crowd continued to chant for mercy and the Praetorian guards secured the arena, Marcus and Lydia stood together in the center of the killing floor, two souls who had found something precious in each other amid the violence and hatred that surrounded them. But even as the immediate danger passed, both of them knew that this was not the end of their story, but only the beginning. Senator Brutus might have been forced to show mercy today, but his hatred was far from extinguished, and the forces that had brought them together in the arena would not simply disappear because the crowd had been moved to compassion. In the shadows of the Colosseum, where political ambition met personal vengeance, darker plans were already taking shape. The wild beast of the arena and the nobleman's daughter had won this battle, but the war for their lives, their freedom, and their chance at love had only just begun. 3 days had passed since the events in the Colosseum, and Marcus found himself in surroundings he had never imagined he would see again. The villa of Senator Lucius Octavius was a masterpiece of Roman architecture, with soaring columns of white marble, intricate mosaics depicting scenes from mythology, and gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly under the Mediterranean sun. It was a world away from the dark cells and blood-soaked sand that had been his reality for so long. He sat on a stone bench beside a fountain where carved dolphins danced in eternal play, clean bandages covering the wounds the lions had given him. A skilled Greek physician had tended to his injuries, using techniques and medicines that were reserved for citizens of status, not gladiatorial slaves. The man had worked with careful precision, ensuring that Marcus would heal properly and that the scars would be minimal additions to the collection he already bore. Despite the luxury surrounding him, Marcus felt profoundly out of place. The soft tunic he wore, dyed in the deep blue that marked him as a guest, rather than a slave, felt strange against skin accustomed to rough leather and bronze armor. His hands, which had known only weapons and chains for years, seemed too large and crude for the delicate beauty that surrounded him. "You're thinking too much," came a gentle voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Lydia approaching, and his breath caught in his throat as it had every time he'd seen her over the past 3 days. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the afternoon light, her dark hair arranged in the classical style favored by Roman women, but it was her eyes that captivated him most. Green as spring leaves and filled with an intelligence that spoke of depths he was only beginning to understand. "I was thinking that I don't belong here," he admitted, rising respectfully as she approached. Despite everything they had shared in the arena, The social barriers between them remained as solid as the walls of Rome itself. Lydia settled gracefully onto the bench, patting the stone beside her in invitation. "Please, sit. And you're wrong, you know. You belong wherever honor and courage are valued, and those qualities are rarer in marble halls than you might think." Marcus sat carefully, maintaining a respectful distance even though every instinct urged him to move closer to the woman who had haunted his thoughts since their first meeting. "Your father has been generous beyond measure, but I'm still a slave, Lydia. The crowd's mercy saved my life, but it didn't change what I am in the eyes of Roman law." "What you are," Lydia said firmly, turning to face him fully, "is the bravest man I've ever known. What you are is someone who was willing to die to protect a stranger. What you are is living proof that nobility has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with character." The passion in her voice stirred something deep in Marcus's chest, a warmth he had thought the arena had killed forever. But even as he felt himself drawn to her, the rational part of his mind reminded him of the impossibility of their situation. "Tell me about your life before," she said softly, her voice carrying the kind of genuine interest that he had rarely encountered. "Before the arena, before all of this, who were you, Marcus Aurelius Maximus?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the fountain's spray catch the sunlight in tiny rainbows. It had been so long since anyone had asked about his past, so long since anyone had seen him as more than a weapon to be used in Rome's bloody entertainment. "I was a soldier," he began slowly, the words feeling strange in his mouth after years of silence on the subject. "A centurion in the 10th Legion, stationed on the Germanic frontier. I commanded 80 men, good soldiers who trusted me to bring them home alive from whatever hell we were sent into." Lydia listened with rapt attention, her eyes never leaving his face as he spoke. There was something in her expression that made him feel safe, as if the words he had kept locked inside for so long could finally be released without judgment. "We were fighting the Cirrisi tribe, trying to establish a permanent Roman presence beyond the Rhine," Marcus continued, lost now in memories that were both precious and painful. "It was during the campaign that I discovered something that would change everything. My commanding officer, a man I had respected and followed into a dozen battles, was selling Roman military secrets to the tribal chiefs." "He was a traitor," Lydia breathed, her hand unconsciously moving closer to his on the stone bench. "More than that, he was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Roman soldiers, including many of my own men. The ambushes that seemed so perfectly timed, the attacks that came just when we were most vulnerable, it was all because he was feeding information to our enemies in exchange for Germanic gold." Marcus's voice grew harder as he relived the betrayal that had cost him everything. "I tried to report it through proper channels, but he had allies in Rome, powerful men who profited from his treachery. When I persisted, when I refused to be silenced, they turned the accusation back on me. Suddenly I was the traitor. I was the one selling secrets to the enemy." "But surely there was evidence, proof of your innocence," Lydia protested, her sense of justice outraged by the injustice he described. Marcus's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. "Evidence can be manufactured, witnesses can be bought, and a senator's word carries more weight than a soldier's oath. Senator Brutus was one of his primary supporters, one of the men who engineered my downfall. He saw to it that I was stripped of my rank, my citizenship, and my freedom. Instead of execution, which would have been merciful, I was sold into slavery and condemned to die slowly in the arena for the entertainment of the very people I had served." The pieces clicked into place in Lydia's mind, and her face paled as she understood the full scope of Brutus's cruelty. "That's why he wanted you to kill me in the arena. It wasn't just about silencing my interference in his affairs. It was personal revenge against you." "Two birds with one stone," Marcus agreed grimly. He could eliminate a troublesome woman who had been helping slaves escape his estates, and he could watch me become the monster he had always claimed I was. In his mind, forcing me to kill an innocent would have been the perfect proof that he had been right about my character all along. Lydia was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what Marcus had endured. The man beside her had lost everything, had been betrayed by the very system he had served, with honor, and yet somehow he had retained his humanity in the face of impossible circumstances. "How did you survive it?" she asked finally. "How did you keep from becoming what they tried to make you?" Marcus turned to look at her, and she saw depths of pain and strength in his eyes that took her breath away. "I remembered who I was before they tried to break me. I remembered the men who had died under my command, good men who deserved better than to be forgotten. I told myself that if I became the beast they wanted me to be, then their deaths would have been meaningless." He paused, his gaze drifting back to the fountain, where the carved dolphins continued their eternal dance. "And I held on to hope that someday, somehow, I might have the chance to prove that honor still mattered, even in the darkest place. When I saw you in that arena, when I realized what Brutus intended, I knew that moment had come." Lydia felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened to his words. She had grown up in a world of privilege and protection, where the greatest hardships were social obligations and political maneuvering. The idea that someone could endure what Marcus had suffered, and still choose compassion over vengeance, was almost incomprehensible to her. "I have a confession to make," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am." Marcus looked at her with concern, seeing the tension that had suddenly appeared in her posture. "What do you mean?" Lydia's hand moved to her throat, where beneath the fabric of her dress lay the pendant she had hidden for so many years. With trembling fingers she drew it out into the light, the Star of David catching the sun like a small beacon of defiance against the world that would condemn her for it. "My mother was Jewish," she said, the words carrying the weight of a secret that could destroy her life if it became public knowledge. "She died when I was 10, but not before she taught me about her faith, her people, and the suffering they have endured at Roman hands. Everything I've done to help slaves escape, all the risks I've taken, it's because I know what it's like to live in fear of being discovered for what you truly are." Marcus stared at the pendant, understanding immediately the courage it had taken for her to reveal this secret. In Rome, Jewish heritage was viewed with suspicion at best and outright hatred at worst. For a senator's daughter to carry such blood was scandalous enough to ruin not only her own life, but potentially her father's political career as well. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked softly. "Because you've shown me what real courage looks like," Lydia replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because you trusted me with your story, and I wanted you to know that you're not the only one who has been forced hide their true self from the world. And because I think I'm falling in love with you, and I couldn't bear for there to be secrets between us." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Marcus felt his heart stop, then begin beating with a rhythm that seemed to echo throughout his entire body. He had dreamed of hearing those words from her, had imagined them during the long nights when sleep brought no peace, but he had never dared to hope they might be real. "Lydia," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "You can't love me. I'm a slave, a gladiator, a man with nothing to offer you but danger and disgrace. Your father has been kind, but if he knew, if anyone knew—" "I don't care," she said fiercely, reaching out to take his hand in both of hers. "I don't care about law or custom, or what people will say. I know what I feel, and I know what I saw in that arena. You are the most honorable man I've ever known, and I would rather face the world's condemnation with you than live a lie without you." Marcus looked down at their joined hands, his dark skin contrasting with her pale fingers, the calluses from sword work rough against her softness. It should have been a reminder of the gulf between them, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "If we do this," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding what they would face, "there's no going back. Your life as you've known it will be over. The privileges, the security, the future your father has planned for you, all of it will be gone. Then we'll build a new future together," Lydia replied, without hesitation. "I've seen what passes for civilization in Rome, Marcus. I've watched senators plot murder for entertainment and call it justice. I've seen slaves treated worse than animals while their masters congratulate themselves on their virtue. If that's the world I'm supposed to embrace, then I choose to reject it." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps caused them to spring apart, their hands separating reluctantly, as they turned to see who was coming. Senator Octavius appeared around a corner of the garden path, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. "Father," Lydia said, rising quickly and smoothing her dress with hands that trembled slightly. "We were just talking about—" "I know what you were talking about," Octavius interrupted, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of Rome's most respected leaders. "I've been watching you both for the past 3 days, and I'm not blind to what's developing between you." Marcus stood as well, his body automatically assuming the rigid posture of a soldier reporting to a superior officer. "Senator, I want you to know that I have conducted myself with complete propriety toward your daughter. I would never dishonor her or your hospitality." Octavius studied the younger man carefully, taking in the sincerity in his eyes and the way he held himself despite his obvious fear of the senator's reaction. "I believe you, Marcus, but the question is, what do we do about it?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken possibilities. Lydia moved closer to Marcus, not quite touching, but making her position clear through her proximity. "I love him, Father," she said simply, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was admitting. "And I believe he loves me. I know it's impossible by Roman standards, but you're going to pursue it anyway," Octavius finished for her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You always were the most stubborn of my children, Lydia. Your mother used to say you inherited her determination along with her beauty." He walked over to the fountain and stood looking into the water for a long moment before speaking again. "Marcus, what are your intentions toward my daughter?" The question was asked in the tone of a father protecting his child, but also of a politician calculating the consequences of various courses of action. Marcus straightened his shoulders and met the senator's gaze directly. "If I were free, sir, I would ask for her hand in marriage and spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift. But I'm not free, and I have nothing to offer her but my love and my promise to protect her with my life. And if I could make you free," Octavius asked quietly, "if I could restore your citizenship and clear your name of the charges that destroyed your former life, what then?" Marcus's heart leaped at the possibility, but years of disappointment had taught him to be cautious about hope. "Is such a thing possible? Difficult, but not impossible," the senator replied. "I have evidence that could exonerate you, documents that prove the real traitor's guilt and your innocence. I've been saving them for the right moment to use against Brutus and his allies. The question is whether you're worth the political capital it would cost me to clear your name." "Father," Lydia began, but Octavius held up a hand to silence her. "This is between Marcus and me, daughter. He needs to answer for himself." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like armor before battle. Everything he had lost, everything he had dreamed of regaining, hung in the balance of his next words. "Senator," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "I cannot promise that I'm worth the sacrifice you would make. I can only promise that if you give me this chance, I will spend every day of my life trying to earn it. I will protect your daughter with my last breath. I will honor the trust you place in me, and I will never forget the debt I owe to your family." Octavius nodded slowly, his evaluation complete. "That's all any man can promise, and more than most would offer." "Very well, Marcus Aurelius Maximus. I will begin the process of restoring your freedom and your name, but understand this. Brutus will not take this lying down. He will fight us with every weapon at his disposal, and the battle will be dangerous for all of us." "We understand, Father," Lydia said, moving to take Marcus's hand openly for the first time. "And we're ready to face whatever comes." As the three of them stood in the garden where Roman order, met the chaos of love, none of them could have imagined the trials that lay ahead. Brutus's network of allies was vast, and his appetite for revenge unlimited. The forces that had destroyed Marcus's life once before were already moving to ensure that his restoration would come at the highest possible price. But for now, in this moment of sunlight and possibility, they allowed themselves to believe that love might triumph over hatred, that justice might prevail over corruption, and that two people from different worlds might find a way to build something beautiful together, despite the forces arrayed against them. The real test of their love and courage was about to begin. The attack came at dawn, when the household was still wrapped in the gentle embrace of sleep. Marcus's soldier instincts woke him at the first sound of steel being drawn in the courtyard below, his body rolling from the comfortable bed and reaching for weapons that weren't there before his mind had fully processed the danger. The villa that had seemed like a sanctuary was suddenly transformed into a battleground, and the illusion of safety that had surrounded them for the past week shattered like glass against stone. From his window, Marcus could see dark figures moving through the garden with the practiced stealth of professional killers. They wore no uniforms, carried no banners, but their coordination and equipment marked them as more than common brigands. These were men who killed for politics rather than profit, and their presence here meant that Senator Brutus had decided to solve his problems with blood rather than law. Marcus pulled on his tunic and rushed into the corridor, his bare feet silent on the marble floor as he made his way toward Lydia's chambers. The villa's layout, which he had studied carefully during his stay, now served him well as he navigated through passages and alcoves that would provide cover from any assassins who had already breached the main building. He found Lydia's door locked from the inside, and his soft knock was answered immediately by her voice, tense with barely controlled fear. "Marcus, is that you?" "Yes," he whispered urgently. "We're under attack. Get dressed quickly and meet me in your father's study. There's a passage behind the bookshelf that leads to the old wine cellar." "What about father?" she asked, and he could hear the terror in her voice despite her attempts to remain calm. "I'll find him. Just go to the study and wait for me there. If I don't come within a quarter hour, use the passage and get as far from Rome as possible." There was a moment of silence before her reply came, steady despite the circumstances. "I'm not leaving without you, Marcus. We face this together, or not at all." Before he could argue with her stubborn courage, the sound of splintering wood echoed from the direction of the main entrance. The assassins had abandoned stealth in favor of speed, and Marcus knew they had only minutes before the villa would be overrun. He made his way toward Senator Octavius's private chambers, moving through the shadows like the hunter he had been trained to be on the Germanic frontier. The skills that had kept him alive in barbarian forests now served him well in the civilized corridors of a Roman villa, and he felt the familiar calm that came with mortal danger settle over his mind. He found the senator already awake and a gladius in his weathered hand and determination in his eyes. Despite being in his 60s, Octavius carried himself with the bearing of a man who had faced death before, and found it wanting. "Brutus?" the senator asked simply. "Almost certainly," Marcus replied, accepting a second sword that Octavius offered him. The familiar weight of the weapon in his hand was both comforting and troubling, a reminder of all the blood he had shed in the arena, and his hope that those days were behind him forever. "How many?" Marcus closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the intruders moving through the villa. Years of combat had taught him to read the subtle signs that revealed enemy numbers and intentions. At least a dozen, probably more. Professional killers, not common thugs. They're spreading out to cover all exits and moving toward the family quarters. Octavius nodded grimly. "There's something you need to know, Marcus. 3 days ago, I submitted the documents that prove your innocence to the Senate for review. If Brutus is moving against us now, it means he's learned about the evidence and decided that killing us is preferable to facing justice." The implications of the senator's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Then this is my fault. If I hadn't asked you to clear my name, if I had simply accepted my fate, Then an innocent man would have remained in chains while a guilty one continued to profit from his crimes. Octavius interrupted firmly. I chose to pursue justice, Marcus, and I knew the risks. Brutus has been a cancer in the Senate for years, and it's time someone cut him out before he spreads further. The sound of approaching footsteps ended their conversation, and both men took positions on either side of the chamber door, their swords ready to meet whatever violence came through it. But instead of armed killers, Lydia appeared in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. She had armed herself with a dagger from her father's collection, and despite her obvious fear, she carried herself with the same dignity that had marked her in the arena. I told you to wait in the study, Marcus said, torn between admiration for her courage and terror for her safety. And I told you we face this together, she replied, taking position beside him with the natural grace that seemed to characterize everything she did. Besides, I know this house better than either of you. There are passages and hiding places that might help us escape. Before either man could argue with her logic, the villa erupted in violence. The assassins had located the family quarters, and the sound of splintering doors and shouted orders echoed through the corridors. Marcus grabbed Lydia's hand, and together with her father, they began moving toward the back of the house, where servants' passages might offer them a chance at escape. They had barely reached the main corridor when dark figures appeared at both ends, trapping them in the open with nowhere to run. The assassins were professionals, their faces covered by dark cloth, and their weapons held with the casual competence of men who killed for a living. At their head stood a figure Marcus recognized, with a chill of recognition. Captain Severus, the brutal guard who had overseen his years in the gladiatorial cells, stepped forward with a smile that was visible even through his mask. Well, the wild beast and his patrician whore, just as Senator Brutus promised. This is going to be even more enjoyable than I anticipated. Let the woman go, Severus, Marcus said, stepping forward to place himself between Lydia and the approaching killers. Your quarrel is with me, not with innocence. Severus laughed, a sound like grinding metal that spoke of years spent in the company of violence and death. Oh, but you're wrong about that, beast. The woman has been causing problems for the senator's business interests, helping slaves escape from his estates and generally making herself a nuisance. And as for the old man, he's been poking his nose into affairs that don't concern him. No, I'm afraid all three of you have appointments with death tonight. Over my dead body, Marcus growled, raising his sword and falling into the combat stance that had served him well in dozens of arena battles. That was always the plan, Severus replied, signaling to his men to attack. What followed was a battle that would have been worthy of the Colosseum itself. Marcus moved with the fluid deadliness that had made him the most feared gladiator in Rome, his sword weaving patterns of death in the narrow corridor as he fought to protect the people he loved. Senator Octavius proved that his years in the legions had not been forgotten, his blade work precise and economical as he covered Marcus's left flank. But it was Lydia who surprised them all. The sheltered nobleman's daughter revealed a core of steel that no one had suspected, using her knowledge of the villa's layout to direct their movement while striking with her dagger when opportunities presented themselves. She had clearly inherited more than just her mother's beauty and her father's stubbornness. The battle was fierce but brief. Marcus and Octavius were skilled warriors, but they were outnumbered 3-1 by men who had come prepared for violence. One by one, the assassins fell to their combined efforts, but not without cost. Octavius took a sword thrust through his shoulder that left his right arm nearly useless, and Marcus accumulated a collection of minor wounds that would have felled a lesser man. When the last assassin lay still on the blood-slicked marble, Severus stood alone, facing three people who had every reason to hate him. His mask had been torn away in the fighting, revealing a face scarred by years of cruelty and marked by the kind of ugliness that came from within. You always were too stubborn to die easily, beast, he snarled, raising his sword for one final attack. But it doesn't matter. Even if you kill me, Brutus has more men, more resources. He'll never stop hunting you. Then I'll have to make sure he can't. Marcus replied, his voice carrying the cold finality of a man who had reached the end of his patience with Roman corruption. The final duel was brief and decisive. Severus was skilled and experienced, but he was facing a man who had survived hundreds of battles against opponents who were trying to kill him rather than simply put on a show. Marcus's sword found its target with surgical precision, and the man who had tormented him for years fell at last. His reign of cruelty ended forever. A silence settled over the villa. Like a shroud, the three survivors stood amid the carnage and tried to process what they had endured. The elegant corridor that had showcased Roman art and culture was now painted with blood, and the illusion of civilized safety that had surrounded their lives was gone forever. "We can't stay here," Octavius said, his voice weak from blood loss, but his mind still sharp. "Brutus will send more men when these don't return, and next time he'll come with a full century of soldiers, rather than a handful of assassins." "Where can we go?" Lydia asked, supporting her father as he swayed from his wounds. "He has allies throughout the empire. There's nowhere in Roman territory where we'll be safe." Marcus looked at the two people who had become his world, seeing the exhaustion and fear in their eyes despite the courage they continued to show. A plan was forming in his mind, desperate and dangerous, but their only real chance for survival. "There is one place," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would change their lives forever. "Beyond the Rhine, in the Germanic territory. I still have contacts there, men who remember me from my days as a centurion. They're not Romans, but they understand honor, and they have no love for senators who betray their own soldiers." Octavius stared at his daughter's protector with a mixture of hope and dismay. "You're talking about exile, Marcus. Leaving Rome, leaving civilization itself. We'd be giving up everything we've ever known. What's the alternative?" Marcus asked gently. "Staying here and fighting a war we can't win against an enemy who has unlimited resource. Watching the people we love die because I was too proud to disappear into the wilderness." Lydia stepped forward, taking Marcus's bloodied hand in her own without flinching from the violence it represented. "If we leave together. All three of us. We find a place where love matters more than politics, where a man's worth is measured by his actions rather than his birth." "It won't be easy," Marcus warned them both, his honesty compelling even in this moment of crisis. "The Germanic tribes are not Roman. Their customs are different, their lives harder. There will be no marble villas, no servants, no luxuries. We'll have to build everything from nothing. Then we'll build it together," Lydia said simply, her voice carrying the same determination that had marked her in the arena. "We'll create our own civilization, one based on the things that actually matter." Octavius looked at his daughter and the man she loved, seeing in their faces the kind of hope that had sustained Rome through its darkest hours. Slowly, painfully, he nodded his agreement. "Very well. If we're going to be exiles, we might as well be exiles together. But first we need to get out of Rome alive, and that's going to require help from people who have their own reasons to hate Brutus." "The underground," Lydia said immediately. "The network I've been working with to help slaves escape. They have safe houses, contacts, ways of moving people without being detected. If anyone can get us out of the city, they can." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the woman who continued to surprise him with her resourcefulness and courage. "Can you contact them?" "There's a baker in the Subura district, a freedman named Gaius, who coordinates much of their activity. If we can reach him, he'll help us disappear." As they prepared to leave the villa that had been their sanctuary and their prison, each of them understood that they were closing the door on their old lives forever. Senator Octavius was abandoning a political career that had spanned decades. Lydia was giving up the comfortable certainty of Roman nobility, and Marcus was accepting that his dream of restoration and vindication would never be realized. But they were also opening a door to something new, something that might prove more valuable than everything they were leaving behind. They were choosing love over law, honor over safety, and hope over the comfortable despair that had characterized so much of Roman life. The journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. would require sacrifices they weren't yet prepared to make, and would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. But they would face it together. And in a world where political alliances shifted like sand and loyalty was bought and sold in the marketplace, that simple fact made them richer than any senator in Rome. As they slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying nothing but weapons and the clothes on their backs, none of them looked back at the life they were abandoning. The future was uncertain, dangerous and fraught with perils they couldn't yet comprehend, but it was theirs to shape, and that made it infinitely more precious than anything they were leaving behind. Behind them, in the shadows of the villa, the bodies of their would-be killers lay as testament to the price of underestimating the power of love to make ordinary people do extraordinary things. And somewhere in Rome, Senator Brutus was about to discover that some victories come at a cost too high to bear, and some enemies are more dangerous in defeat than they ever were in triumph. 2 years had passed since the night they fled Rome, and the morning sun painted the Germanic forest in shades of gold and emerald that no Roman artist had ever captured on marble or canvas. Marcus stood at the edge of their settlement, watching the mist rise from the river that had become their highway to a new world, and marveled at how completely his life had been transformed by the choices they had made in desperation and love. The village they had built with their own hands bore little resemblance to Roman architecture, but it possessed something that all the marble palaces of the empire lacked. It was home. Simple wooden structures with thatched roofs housed the growing community of refugees, escaped slaves and Germanic tribespeople who had gathered around the unlikely alliance between a former gladiator, a senator's daughter, and the old politician himself. What they had created was neither fully Roman nor fully barbarian, but something entirely new, a fusion of cultures united by shared values, rather than conquest or subjugation. "You're up early again," came Lydia's voice from behind him, and Marcus turned to see his wife emerging from their modest dwelling, her belly rounded with the child that would be born before winter's end. She wore the simple woolen dress of a Germanic woman, her dark hair braided in the practical style, favored by the tribes, but her eyes still held the intelligence and strength that had captivated him in the arena of the Colosseum. "The baby was restless again," Marcus replied, moving to embrace her gently, his large hands settling protectively over the life they had created together. "I think he's going to be a warrior, like his father, or a diplomat like her grandfather," Lydia countered, with a smile, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady heartbeat that had become her anchor in this strange new world. "Octavius insists the child will be a girl with my stubborn nature and your protective instincts." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their village come to life as smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sounds of daily labor began to fill the air. Children who had been born into slavery in Roman estates now ran free through the forest paths, their laughter a testament to the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest circumstances. Former gladiators worked alongside Germanic craftsmen, sharing skills and stories that bridged the gap between civilizations that had been taught to hate each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of a question they had both avoided for 2 years. "Do you ever wish we had found another way, stayed in Rome and fought Brutus through legal channels?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering not just her words, but the life they had built in the shadow of that impossible choice. "Every morning I wake up beside you. Every evening I watch our people gather to share food and stories. Every night I hold you close and know that you're safe. How could I regret the path that led us here?" "But you were innocent," Lydia pressed, her Roman sense of justice still stirring despite everything they had experienced. "Your name should have been cleared, your honor restored. You deserved vindication, not exile." Marcus turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands, with the gentleness that had first shown her the man behind the gladiator's reputation. "My love, I have something more valuable than vindication. I have truth. Everyone in this village knows who I really am, knows what I've done, and what I stand for. I don't need Rome's approval to validate my existence." "And what about our child?" Lydia asked, her hand moving to cover his where it rested on her belly. "What will we tell them about the world we left behind? We'll tell them the truth," Marcus replied without hesitation. "That we chose love over law, hope over hatred, and building something beautiful over destroying something ugly. Will teach them that honor isn't something granted by governments or crowds, but something you carry in your heart regardless of what others think." From across the village, Senator Octavius approached with the careful gait of a man whose shoulder had never fully healed from the assassin's blade. At 68, he looked more like a tribal elder than a former Roman politician. His toga long since replaced by practical Germanic clothing, and his carefully maintained appearance given way to the weathered look of a man who worked with his hands. "The morning council is gathering," he announced, but his formal words were accompanied by a warm smile as he embraced his daughter and the son-in-law who had become closer to him than his own blood. "The Cherusee delegation has arrived, and they're eager to finalize the trade agreements we've been negotiating." "Trade agreements," Marcus mused, shaking his head in wonderment. 2 years ago I was killing their warriors for Roman entertainment. Now I'm negotiating grain supplies and craft exchanges." "People change," Octavius observed, his political wisdom tempered by the hard lessons of exile. "Circumstances change. What matters is whether we change for the better or simply become harder versions of what we were before." The three of them made their way to the village center, where a remarkable gathering was taking place. Germanic chieftains sat beside former Roman slaves, their differences in language and custom bridged by translators and, more importantly, by shared respect for the community they had all helped to build. At the center of the circle, a fire burned continuously, its flames fed by contributors from every household, as a symbol of their collective commitment to their new way of life. The negotiations that followed would have fascinated Roman political scholars, had any been present to observe them. There were no grand speeches, no appeals to ancient law or divine mandate. Instead, practical people discussed practical solutions to mutual problems, seeking agreements that would benefit everyone rather than simply advancing the interests of the most powerful. Marcus found himself serving as translator and mediator, his years on the Germanic frontier having given him fluency in tribal dialects that now proved invaluable in building bridges between cultures. He watched former enemies work together to solve problems of food distribution and defense, and realized that what they had created here was the kind of civilization that Rome claimed to represent but had never actually achieved. "The grain surplus from the river settlements can be traded for metalwork from the mountain clans," suggested Brunhild, a fierce Germanic warrior woman who had become one of their most trusted allies. "And the medical knowledge that Lydia has been teaching our healers could be shared with the coastal tribes in exchange for preserved fish and salt." "A fine proposal," agreed Gaius, the former baker who had helped them escape Rome and had eventually followed them into exile when Brutus's purges made the city too dangerous for anyone associated with the Underground Railroad. "But we should also consider what happens if Roman patrols venture this far north. Our prosperity will mean nothing if we can't defend it." The discussion that followed was sobering but necessary. Rome's reach was long, and Senator Brutus's hatred was patient. They had built something beautiful in the wilderness, but they could not pretend that the world they had left behind would simply ignore their existence forever. "I've been thinking about this problem for months," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying the authority that leadership had naturally settled upon him, despite his reluctance to accept it. "We can't match Rome's military might, but we don't have to. What we have here is something Rome has never possessed. Unity born from choice rather than conquest." He stood and moved to the map they had drawn on a large piece of leather, marking the territories of various tribes and settlements scattered throughout the region. "Individually, we're all vulnerable, but together, allied by trade and mutual defense, rather than domination, we could create something that even Rome would hesitate to challenge." "A confederation of free peoples," Octavius mused, his political mind immediately grasping the implications of what Marcus was proposing. Not an empire built on conquest, but a voluntary association of communities united by shared interests and values. "It's been done before," Brunhild added, her eyes bright with possibilities. The tribal councils, the trade leagues of the northern seas, but never on this scale, and never with such diversity of peoples. The debate continued for hours, but gradually consensus began to emerge. They would send emissaries to settlements throughout the region, offering alliance based on mutual benefit rather than submission. They would create networks of communication and trade that would make them collectively stronger than any of them could be alone. And they would do it all based on the principles that had brought them together, that every person had value regardless of birth, that cooperation was stronger than domination, and that love was more powerful than fear. As the council session ended and people began to disperse to their daily tasks, Marcus found himself alone with Lydia beside the eternal fire that burned at the heart of their community. She had been quiet during the discussions, but he could see her mind working as she processed the magnitude of what they were attempting. A confederation of free peoples, she repeated softly, testing the words like a prayer. Do you think it's possible, Marcus? Can we really build something that lasts? Something that our children will inherit with pride? Marcus pulled her close, feeling the movement of their unborn child between them like a promise of the future they were fighting to create. I think we've already built something extraordinary, my love. The question is whether we have the courage to keep building, to keep believing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're motivated by love instead of fear. And if Rome comes for us, if Brutus finally tracks us down, then we'll face that challenge the same way we've faced all the others, Marcus replied with quiet confidence. Together, as a family, as a community, as people who refuse to let hatred win. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning when the forest blazed with colors that rivaled any imperial tapestry, Lydia gave birth to their daughter. The midwife was a former Roman slave who had learned healing arts from Germanic wise women, and the first sounds the child heard were lullabies sung in 3 different languages by women who had been enemies before love taught them to be sisters. Marcus held his daughter for the first time as the sun set over the village they had built, and looked into dark eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the ages. She would grow up free, he realized, truly free in a way that neither he nor Lydia had ever been. Free from the expectations that birth imposed, free from the hatred that politics demanded, free to choose her own path in a world where love was valued more than power. What shall we name her? Lydia asked, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband fall in love with their child. Marcus thought of all the names that carried meaning in the various cultures that had come together in their village. Roman names that spoke of virtue and strength, Germanic names that honored the spirits of forest and river, Jewish names that remembered the struggles and triumphs of an ancient people. But when he spoke, the name that came from his lips was something entirely new, something that belonged only to this place and this moment. Hope, he said simply. Her name is Hope because that's what she represents. The hope that the world can be better than we found it, that love can triumph over hatred, that ordinary people can build extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable. Years passed and the Confederation of Free Peoples grew stronger with each season. Trade routes that had been carved by Roman legions now carried goods exchanged freely between communities that had chosen cooperation over conquest. Children who had been born enemies played together in forests where their parents had once fought, and gradually the very concept of barbarian versus civilized began to lose its meaning. Marcus never returned to Rome, never sought the vindication that Roman law might have eventually provided, but his story traveled anyway, carried by traders and refugees who spoke of a place beyond the Rhine where a former gladiator had become a leader not through violence, but through love, where a senator's daughter had found purpose not in politics, but in healing, where an old politician had discovered that true governance meant serving others rather than ruling them. Senator Brutus died in his bed, surrounded by wealth, but alone, his network of corruption finally collapsing under the weight of its own malice. His last words, according to those who witnessed his final moments, were a bitter complaint about the gladiator who had escaped his vengeance. He never understood that his true punishment had not been death or disgrace, but simply being forgotten by people who had found better things to do than hate. On quiet evenings when the village gathered around the eternal fire to share stories and song, Marcus would sometimes tell the tale of how he met his wife in an arena where they were meant to destroy each other, but chose instead to save one another. The children would listen with wide eyes as he described the moment when he dropped his weapons and ran toward danger rather than away from it, and they would learn that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from refusing to become what your enemies want you to be. "I feel your fear," he would conclude, repeating the words he had spoken to a terrified woman in the Colosseum so long ago. "So don't worry, I'm just a normal man." And then he would smile and add the words that completed the thought, "But a normal man who chooses love over hatred can change the world." As the stars wheeled overhead and the fire cast dancing shadows on the faces of people who had chosen to build rather than destroy, Marcus would hold his wife close and watch their daughter play with children whose parents had once been strangers, enemies, or slaves. They had lost everything the world told them was valuable: status, wealth, security, the approval of their peers. And in return they had gained something infinitely more precious. They had gained the chance to love without reservation, to build without permission, to hope without apology. They had discovered that home was not a place on a map, but a feeling in the heart, and that family was not defined by blood, but by choice. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.